Good morning, everyone. All right, that's better. I'm Paul Fry, I'm the president of the Hagerstown, Washington County Chamber of Commerce. Welcome this morning to our forum. Mr. Bongino is on his way in. We're going to start with some announcements. And first of all, again, I'd like to welcome you to our first of the Decision 14 forums, our 6th District Congressional Forum. We'd like to thank Hager Hall and their staff here. Let's give them a round of applause for breakfast and for hospitality. We'd also like to thank this morning's sponsors, Antietam Cable Television. They're going to have all the forums on video on demand. Let's give Antietam Cable a round of applause. After 5 Productions, they're having all the video productions and AV equipment. Let's give them a round of applause. I told Jim, when they do things well, we don't talk about them. When it doesn't, we do. So thank you, Jim, for what you're doing for us. I'd also like to thank the chamber staff, Donna, Catherine, Jill, and Kendra. Ladies, would you kind of wave your hands? They helped get this organized set up. Thank you. And we have at least one of our locally elected officials here this morning, and if I missed anyone, we've tried to track everybody. I apologize. We have Washington County Commissioner John Barr. Mr. Barr, good morning. And there may be one or two show up, and as they do, we'll acknowledge them. We'd also like to introduce at least one new member who's here today, Hardware Discounts Incorporated, Jane and Stu Mullendor. They're over at this table. Good morning, welcome. We are a membership organization. Without members, we don't exist, so thank you for your trust in us. I'd also like to introduce one of our 2014 Washington County Business Award winners here this morning, the Large Business of the Year, Harold Mail Media. So congratulations. And lastly, I'd like to thank our Government Affairs Committee for the Chamber. They worked really hard gathering questions from our membership and formatting that this morning. So let's give the Government Affairs Committee for the Chamber a round of applause. Thank you. So I'd like to explain the format for this morning, and all of our candidates and their respective staffs have previously received these rules. So hopefully there's no surprise here. They haven't changed since we sent them out. I will be moderating this forum this morning. This is not a debate. This will be a question and answer. And again, the questions came from our membership. And I will not be straying from our format. So candidates, if I'm just exhibiting my recovering type A personality, I want to stick to the format. So thank you in advance for your cooperation here. Each candidate will have the opportunity to answer all questions asked. We're going to rotate which candidates go first for the questions. And then second and third, and we'll do that throughout the morning with the questions. Again, the questions were received from chamber membership, and so these are the questions that we've been asked to ask on behalf of the membership. The candidates will each have 2 minutes for an opening statement, so 2 minutes at the opening, and then they'll have 90 seconds to answer each question. Donna Long, our timekeeper, she will let us know when there's 30 seconds left. She'll flash a yellow card, which is right there, as you can see. When her time is up, she'll flash a red card. So we would really like to ask you to honor that time frame, and if we all play by the same rules, it will make my job a little easier and make it a little bit happier this morning. If time allows, we'll have a closing statement by each candidate. We think that's going to occur, so we'll have about 90 seconds for a closing statement. And then after the event, when we're finished with the formal questions, the candidates will be around and can ask your specific questions at that point. So at this point, we'd like to bring up the candidates. We have Republican candidate Don Bongino, Democratic incumbent John Delaney, and Green Party candidate George Gluck. So John, will you please join us up? So I do know it's Dan Bongino, and I apologize. Mr. Bongino.
Everybody says that.
So we'd like to have a 2-minute introduction by each candidate, and we'll start out about a quarter. So we'll start with Mr. Bongino, 2 minutes, sir.
Well, first, thank you all for having me. Thank you for hosting this forum, and thank you to my staff as well for always stepping up to the plate to get the job done on the logistics side. Folks, this is a very important election. I want to nail it down to 3 issues. If we had to triage our problems right now, and they are numerous, unfortunately, as a country, I would say it comes down to the economy, healthcare, and education. And we have to ask ourselves right now some very difficult questions. It's a shame we have to ask these questions, but we're at the point now in the economy where we have to ask ourselves, do we feel that our money rightfully belongs to us or belongs to the government? When the president says things like fairness, when he mentions fairness, he's not talking about fairness for you, he's talking about fairness for government. When they mention things like you didn't build that, it's referring to your business. Well, I assure you that my wife and I, as small business owners, we built that. When she sat there on the couch when we had our second child, feeding our child at 4 o'clock in the morning, finishing up a website she was building for a company while she didn't sleep, I assure you, she built it. Education. Again, we have to ask ourselves some very difficult questions right now. Is your child's education yours? Or does where your child goes to school, does that decision belong to the government? You paid for it. You built those schools. Finally, healthcare. We have to ask ourselves right now, does your healthcare belong to you? Or does the decision-making process belong to someone else? Obamacare has been a disaster. It has been a disaster because it took away the decision-making process from people who put money into this system their entire lives, and it put it in the hands of unelected bureaucrats. My grandmother worked her entire life. She's 93 years old. If she happens to need a new hip, that's a decision that belongs to her. Again, this election has some important questions. I hope you consider those. Thank you.
Congressman Delaney.
Great, thank you, Paul. And I want to thank the Chamber for organizing the event here this morning so that we can have an opportunity to have this conversation. And I was particularly excited to be here with so many business owners and business leaders and business managers, because for most of my career, prior to my decision 2 years ago to enter public service, I was on your side of the table, as opposed to this side of the table. As I think many people know, I spent my whole career as an entrepreneur, business owner, started 2 companies here in Maryland, created a few thousand jobs, and really did what you have to do to build a business in the private sector. Worried about getting capital, worried about making payroll, figure out financing, keep or get that important contract that makes or breaks your business, deal with irrational competition, deal with regulations that don't make sense, deal with a complicated and misguided tax system. I had to deal with all that stuff. And so my approach to the private economy of the United States of America is not based on theories or something I read in books or something I learned in a family business. My dad was an electrician, so he wasn't in business. It's what I learned in the real world. And I bring that perspective to the Congress of the United States. And as a result, one of my main areas of focus is the competitiveness of Washington County, of the 6th District of Maryland as a whole, and the United States of America as a whole. Because unless we successfully compete as an economy, we will not be able to create jobs that have decent standard of living. We will not be able to have a growing economy which gives us financial flexibility for everything we care about. And that's the perspective I bring to the Congress. But I also bring another perspective. As someone who's used to solving problems and working with people to get things done, I've brought a unique kind of bipartisan view to try to get things done. Everything I've done in the Congress so far has been bipartisan. Got one of the most bipartisan voting records because as someone who's in the private sector, it's about solving problems and seizing opportunities. So I look forward to the discussion today.
Thank you. Mr. Gleb?
Thank you. First, again, I'd like to thank you for holding this event and especially for inviting a third-party member. There are many organizations that won't hold an event at all if they think they have to invite a third-party member. So I thank you for doing that. And I'd like to let you know, you've invited me here, but I'd like to let you know what brought me here. So I'm George Gluck, the candidate, Green Party candidate for Maryland's 6th Congressional District. And I'm here to ask you to invite you on November 4th to vote for a Democrat. But not the Democrat that has Democrat after his name on the ballot. The candidate who has Democrat after his name on the ballot. In 1968, I became eligible to vote for the first time. So I registered. I recall that a Democratic Congress, Democratic President had recently enacted, signed into law, civil rights legislation, voting rights legislation, anti-poverty legislation. I felt very comfortable registering as a Democrat and voting for Democrats, then and for many years thereafter. In our predominantly two-party system, Republicans tend to try to vote to reach the voter who's just to the left of the median in the political spectrum, and the Democrats try to reach the voter who's just to the right of the median. So in 1968, when I started to vote, that median, the person who was in the median, hadn't moved very far from where she was when Dwight Eisenhower ran in 1960. Since then, she's moved far to the right, and in 1985, the Democrats started the Democratic Leadership Council and moved to the right along with the Republicans. So despite that, I voted for, and I helped Clinton and gave money and time in 92. But when NAFTA was passed in 96, I could no longer be a Democrat. I looked around and found the Green Party was the 1968 Democratic Party. So on November 4th, I'm going to ask you to vote for a Democrat, the one that had the Green Party after his name on the ballot. Thank you.
Thank you, gentlemen. Mr. Bongiorno, you will answer the first question first, then we'll go to Mr. Delaney, and then to Mr. Clark, and then we'll rotate this. So the first question is this. What is your vision for Western Maryland, and how should Washington County position itself for economic success? And what's your role in helping achieve this vision?
The fact that Washington County is not a bedrock of economic activity for the region is not the fault of the people of Washington County. The population here has actually been growing for quite some time. It's the fault of government. And although I want everyone here to be clear, this race will never be personal between me and Congressman Delaney. I have tremendous respect for him personally. This is an issues-based race and will remain that way. We differ substantially on that vision going forward. You have a corporate tax code, a federal tax code, that is so bloated that when you layer on the ridiculous regulations by the Maryland state government, in addition to Obamacare and the high tax rates for the region, it's no wonder the people in this area call the taxes flow taxes, because people flow to Pennsylvania, to West Virginia, to Virginia. They don't want to stay here because Maryland has destroyed the local business environment. If we were to simply cut the corporate tax rate, are we trying to win the gold medal of corporate taxation? We are now #1 in the industrialized world. If we just cut it to the international average between 17 and 20%, businesses would flow back into Maryland. You are at the intersection of the Western Maryland economy with 81 and 70. There is no excuse for this area here. There's a business owner I'm looking at right now in this region. If you were to just cut his costs and unlayer government from suffocating his business, he could probably expand tomorrow. But he can't do that because in Maryland we're just not willing to be reasonable anymore.
Right?
So Washington County obviously has a diverse economy, and to some extent your economy is fairly reflective of the U.S. economy, which is why the headwinds you're experiencing are consistent with what we've seen around the country. There's a couple of unique assets that we've got to think about in Washington County. Obviously, the I-81 corridor is really important. Washington County plays an important role as part of kind of the super regional economy between Boston and Richmond. And this country is increasingly organized along these regional economies. And so we have to make sure that this area, from a logistics, distribution, transportation perspective, is as competitive as possible, which means we have to make investments in our infrastructure here. I've been a big supporter of the widening and expansion of 81, which is really important. I've been a leader across the country in the Congress in putting forth a big bipartisan infrastructure bill, which also deals with tax reform. I agree with Dan that we do need to do corporate tax reform. Our corporate tax rate is too high, but even more than that, I think we need to fix our international system, which is keeping a lot of money trapped overseas and preventing investment here. So I think Washington County should focus on that. I think if we could also make infrastructure investments in the Montgomery County and Frederick corridor, it would actually open up Washington County to more of the natural growth that's occurring around Washington, D.C. So my vision for Washington County is to think strategically about where it fits, create an environment here that will attract more businesses. I like what New York State is doing around these startup enterprise zones. I would encourage, and I have encouraged, the candidates running for governor to make that part of their platform, because that's a state-based issue. So I create some enterprise zones here, and I invest in infrastructure, and I think that together with good national policies will create more economic growth here in Washington County.